Hello there, I'm Debbie Elley. Welcome to my talk, and it's called Background Anxiety and the 3 Methods to Reduce It. Background anxiety is something that I don't think people write about enough. I don't think people talk about it enough, and there's a reason for that. When we experience anxiety, we might have a sudden outburst. We might withdraw, or we might just be stubborn. And this kind of behaviour is really obvious. So when an autistic child does that, whether that's at home or at school, we tend to notice it. That's when we notice anxiety, and we might think, what do I do about that? Try and get to the bottom of it. But background anxiety with an autistic person is actually a bit like white noise. It's always about. Why is it so important to recognise it and to tackle it? Well, the reason is, if you're able to create an environment where that background anxiety is a lot lower, something great happens. Things don't build up so much, and you tend to find that the outbursts that you see when anxiety gets really troublesome, they happen a lot less. Just going to do you a little demonstration here. It's something that I've done at my talks with my co-editor Tori Houghton. And it might have been done before. I don't think we have the copyright on it, but we thought we came up with this idea. This represents an autistic child. It's Coca-Cola. And this represents somebody who's not autistic. This is water. You'll notice something about water is it's quite inert. Nothing really happens with it most of the time. It just stays there. Look at what happens when you shake it up. Well, it stays fizzy for a little bit, but it quickly gets back to being quite still, doesn't it? That's what happens with most of us. We get stressed, and then we calm down reasonably quickly. Now, in the case of somebody with autism, you'll notice that they're always a bit fizzy. That's what I call background anxiety. It's always there. And as a result, it's not inert. So it doesn't really take very much when you shake it up for things to really get quite fizzy. Can you see that? Now, the other thing that you'll notice is it takes a lot longer to calm down. It's more explosive, and it takes a lot longer to get back to the stage where it was before. So that's why it's so important to understand these 2 different mentalities. And there's one other thing that isn't made much of, and that is the relationship between rigidity of thought and anxiety. Now, a lot of people think that rigidity of thought, which of course is a core trait of autism, causes anxiety. They don't like routine, being disturbed, they don't like change, the unexpected. It all stresses them out, and this causes anxiety. And this is true to a certain extent. But guess what? It happens the other way around as well. If you are constantly anxious, you're more rigid, aren't you? And less able to learn. And that is why managing background anxiety is so very important, both at home and at school. There's an effect that works both ways. And it's true to say that that background anxiety causes an enormous amount of problems for autistic people. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to recognise what background anxiety is and how you're going to help create that background sense of calm, which will not only help your children to feel calmer and manage their own behaviour better, but of course it will also help them to take on board new ideas, be more flexible and learn better. Okay, well, before we go any further, I think it's fair to point out that the ideas that I'm going to bring to you today don't come from a textbook. They may end up in one, but they didn't come from one. They came through my lived experience with autistic twins. My twins, Bobby and Alec, are 16 years old. One of them attends mainstream school. He's just left and hopefully will start college in September. He's verbal, but he's had support at mainstream school. The other one, Elley, he is non-verbal. He has complex and multiple learning difficulties, and he goes to a special school. So what I'm talking about when I say looking after the background anxiety is something that I've learned over the last 16 years of living with these two, and really seeing personally just how much of a difference it makes. So what do we mean by background anxiety? Well, a lot of people know that there's a connection between autism and anxiety. The core traits of autism come with a side dish of anxiety. It stands to reason, doesn't it, that if your thinking is inflexible and that you don't like changes to your routine and that they tend to happen quite often, that's going to make you anxious. Coupled with that, you've got communication and social difficulties, and into the mix, you've got sensory issues as well. Sensory issues, the way that your environment is reactive around you, and the various difficulties that you might experience that other people just simply don't feel, like temperature, as well as the feel of things, as well as how bright something is and how loud something is. Now, these are the obvious things. But there's one other thing that is absolutely key when it comes to background anxiety, and that is processing. So for this, I'm going to show you a little analogy. I like my analogies because it allows people to think of things more easily, to picture them. So most people we treat like washing machines. Bung all the information in whatever order, press start, and expect action. That is how we give people information. Blah, 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 verbally, whatever we like, in whatever particular order. We don't really think about it, do we? Autistic people are more like ticket machines. You know the ticket machines that you get at arcades, where you'll get a little strip of tickets when you win some games. Usually like have about 1 million tickets and you win something for 20p. Excuse me, needs mass coffee. It's early in the day. So they're more like ticket machines. You will notice that you have to feed the ticket into the ticket machine in a certain way at a certain speed. Otherwise it gets all in a tangle. So their way of processing things is different. And in order to reduce the background anxiety, that's something that needs to be understood. So now I'm going to get on to the 3 key ways that I found help reduce background anxiety, creating that wonderful knock-on effect that the whole tone in your house is more calm. The first is control. The second is comfort. And the third is communication. So quite handily, we've ended up with 3 C's. Didn't design it that way, but it's nice and memorable, isn't it? So, firstly, let's talk about control. Control is the way that you allow a person to process information. And a lot of the time, and it's not our fault, we're just used to dealing with children like this. You might just ask them to do something, or fire some instructions at them, or give them a lot of information. If you think of them like a ticket machine, the best way really of getting a response is, rather than present all that information up front as if you're loading a washing machine, ask a question and let them take it in their own way. So I'm going to give you some examples, because I always think that examples brings it to life more, of how this works at home for me. So my son Bobby is like any teenager, right? And he's not too great at tidying his room. Much as he likes routine and order, this doesn't seem to apply to tidying his room. So I could go in his room, and believe me, I am tempted, and say, clean up this mess. Look at this mess. You won't be able to find anything. Blah, blah, blah. Heighten the anxiety. Remember, we're already a bit fizzy. And then that could quite easily cause a meltdown over something that simple. So the way that I do this is that I show Bobby the logic behind my thinking and I get him to come up with the solution. Remember the ticket machine? He is coming up with the information, not me. So I'll go into his room and I'll look at it and I go, I'm a bit worried, Bob. And I sort of tend to guide with that kind of statement because then when he's actively listening for information, he takes it in better. So I go, why? So, well, I'm worried that, your room's getting a bit messy. Just a bit worried. Some of your toys, like your 3DS games, are quite small, aren't they? Gosh, I'm just worried that you just won't be able to find them. Thing is, I don't know what you do about that, really. Playing Thicko is my favourite game because then they come up with the answer. So go, maybe my desk could do with a tidy. Do you think? Oh, that's a really good idea. Brilliant idea, Bobby. Oh, when do you think you should do that then? Again, handing back over control. Not saying do it now, but when should you do that? Let's get an agreement. Oh, I'll do it in half an hour when I've finished playing this game. That's a great idea. Well done. Now, believe me, it doesn't always work, but it works enough of the time to make a huge difference. Another example that I can think of is when there is resistance to a new idea. So I had a time timer. If you don't know what a time timer is, you can look them up on Sensory Direct, sell them, or you can indeed have a time timer app on your phone. It's a couple of quid. It's brilliant. What a time timer is what I call an independent referee. So instead of you saying, look, you've got 45 minutes left, your time timer says it for you. It's a visual timer, that's all it is. But it shows the time counting down as a section of cake going through the clock. So it's very visual, you can see exactly how much time you've got left. So we have a physical time timer, they're quite expensive, but they're worth the weight in gold. Now, I actually brought up this idea of a time timer at a conference once. I said how good it was, and a parent came up to me afterwards and she said, the time timer is a brilliant idea, but he just never agreed to it. And I said, well, it all depends on the way that you put that to him. So how about you put it to him to make it look like it's his idea? Again, think of the ticket machine analogy. So I suggested saying, you know how when you've got half an hour left to play your games and then I just keep coming in and nagging you. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be brilliant if there was some sort of gadget so that I didn't have to nag you? And you end up saying together, yeah. You go, oh, hold on. Do you know what? There is. Yes, I've read about it. It's called a time timer. Now this makes it look like you've come up with that idea between you. All that you've done actually is agree on the outcome that you want. And then you've sort of secretly suggested what might help you get there. We do it all the time at home and it works absolute wonders, but it's gaining control of that environment. Now, the thing about being a kid in general, even if you don't have autism, is that you're in a terrible situation, really, because parents and carers, they have all the control, don't they? And that produces anxiety. So what's really good is to give them control over the things that it's okay to control. Think of all the little decisions that you make for them every day. How can they control those decisions for themselves? What will give them a high sense of self-esteem? Background calm, because they're making their own decisions, because they're in charge of their own destiny. They could decide what they wear, and they could decide what they do and in what order. The other thing is that because autistic kids can have poor executive functioning, we as parents, wanting to help them get their work done, we can take over that for them, can't we? And I've been guilty of doing it in the past. I'll sit down, I'll make sure that the homework is done at a certain time and that it's taken the right amount of time, and I'll sit by them whilst they're doing it. Now, that's fair enough, the work will be done, but what it doesn't do is give that person a sense of control. So I found a different way of doing it which worked much better. I thought about the decision-making process that I go through when I have a deadline. Well, the first thing I do is I look at the deadline date and then I count back from it. So, my deadline date is the 20th of August and I now have 15 days to work towards that deadline. So then what we created was a homework wipe-off chart with every piece of homework, with the deadline, and more importantly, with the days to that deadline written down. Then every day I taught Bobby to wipe off the amount of days and put the new amount in its place, counting down. Then we made the decision between us that the easiest thing to do would be to work on the piece of work first that had the least amount of days. Now, this sort of thinking is automatic to you and I because we have executive functioning. To autistic people, it's not so obvious, and that's why you might get them leaving things till last minute and a whole amount of stress that's connected with that. What we need to do is, instead of taking over their thinking for them, is to put some scaffolding in so that they can do the thinking for themselves. Again, this is all about placing them in control so that they do not feel that without you there's no control to be had. We found with the wipe-off board with homework that Bobby was a lot more in control of the situation. He knew exactly what was happening, and if there was just 4 days to go and he hadn't noticed, I could always point at the chart, which again was a lovely independent referee. You might at the moment be hearing my cat, who cannot let me do a video without interrupting. If he comes into view, I'll show him. And just quickly say hello. This is Ernie. Right, sorry, he has to star in every video, I don't know why. So control. Control by, instead of continually asking them questions and giving them instructions, just play dumb, get them to think of the answers for themselves, then praise like crazy when they come up with a simple idea. If they're not coming up with simple ideas, by the way, I tend to just whisper, I think I've thought of something. I'm not sure though, I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not. And then Bobby will say, no, what? Tell me. So the whole thing becomes a discussion rather than you just imposing lots of ideas on them. So that's control. The next thing I'm going to talk about is comfort. Now, there's something I refer to in my talks at schools about comfort. I call it pivotal comforts. I don't know, I just like inventing my own jargon, don't ask me why. But pivotal comforts are those things that form a turning point in any child's day. If you like, you can think of them as pit stops. The thing with autistic kids, particularly at school, is that they are subject to a number of demands that will cause them anxiety. And remember that background anxiety is always there. So as well as all the background noise, they'll have demands, instructions, and they'll be required to process things in a way that doesn't make sense to them and that is overloading for them. So I identified the things with Bobby that have given him the most comfort, and I communicate that to school. But it's important to recognise it for home as well. One of the key things that gives Bobby comfort is computers. And you'll probably all be looking heavenwards at this point, because that's not unusual for autistic people. In fact, Tony Attwood, the great author Tony Attwood, has referred to computers as thought blockers, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at it, really. He's suggesting that social and emotional overload can be so overwhelming to autistic children that actually the relief of something that doesn't require that causes them to play with computers, possibly more than other youngsters would. I'd argue that computers are really quite an important part of autistic life. They enable people to get knowledge without making demands back. They enable people to share thoughts without lots of social demands back. So I do think that they're quite important. And what troubles me sometimes is when parents use the computer as a source of punishment. So computer time is taken away if they've been naughty. Sometimes that worries me because I see what other people see as naughty actually a reaction to this background stress and overload, and I don't like it when I think that it's getting mixed up. But more importantly, if you see the computer as a little bit of a survival tool, and I know that sounds really dramatic, but it is an escape, then using it as punishment, you can see how difficult that would be, and it's not surprising that you get huge meltdowns and overloads. What I would suggest instead is to encourage good behaviour by promising extra computer time rather than taking away computer time for what you see as bad behaviour. I've always said that there's nothing in the words "don't do that" to encourage autistic children to know what they should be doing instead. Whereas if you reward something and you say, do you know what, you were really thoughtful about that, you did that really well, then they know exactly what to do right in the future. So I'd say use rewards, and don't forget that the computer can be one of those comforts. Other comforts include using photographs in new and strange environments. It's like making a mini world around you. Like the snail carries its shell with it. I've heard parents joking that their kids' school bags weigh about a ton because they insist on taking their whole world with them. But that's a comfort thing, and that's quite understandable if you're autistic. So identify those pivotal comforts. What is it that makes that difference to that day? I'd also say that having little pit stops for mindfulness exercises, Headspace, by the way, I really recommend this as an app for children and adults. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's made a huge difference to Bobby's life. Bobby has 10 minutes of Headspace, whether he's at school or whether he's at home. That helps him to get that background calm that we're looking for. I also encourage exercise, but not formal exercise, because he doesn't like that. So I might give him a job to do, like go to the local post box, and he is then contributing to my work for me. So these calming things can help tremendously. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, because we're running out of time, is communication. One of the things we tend to do with autistic kids, whether we are parents or whether we are teachers, is chat to our autistic children when there's a problem, to try and get to the root of that problem. Now, what I feel is best is to keep the route to communication open at all times, and the way that you do that is by having a little check-in every day. So at the end of a day, I will usually sit on the end of Bobby's bed for 5 minutes, and I'll just sit there and ask him what he's up to on the computer. I don't say, tell me about your day or anything like that, but I would ask him, here's Bobby, do you want to say hello?
Is it okay to message, please?
Yeah. This is life in the real world with autistic kids. Yeah, it's all right. But I've got him to credit for the fact that I'm actually talking to you at all, since he knows how technology works better than me. So swings and roundabouts. But yeah, communication. So that little evening talk. Now that is whether things are going well or whether things are going badly. The thing is, it's in place. It's there. 10 minutes a day. How's it going? Talk about something positive. Talk about what they want to talk about. They lead the talk, you leave the pauses and fill in. And if they say, get out my room now, you're not required, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. But you make that little space in the day for communication. Now, this means that anxiety does not get a chance to build to the state where it's in crisis point. It's all about nipping it in the bud. So that communication is really important. I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot of ideas there in a very short space of time. My kids are starting to make an appearance. The cat's making an appearance. I think it's best to quit whilst I'm ahead, but I'm very happy to answer your questions. And thanks for listening. Bye now. Hi, I've come to answer your questions, and thanks very much for sending in some brilliant ones. So the first one is, how can parents help grow their children's communication and social skills while social distancing? That's a good question. Actually, home is a really great place for developing social skills. I call it a safe training ground, home. So rather than sort of setting aside 10 minutes a day where they can talk about special interests non-stop, which some people do, I would say, let your young person talk about what interests them, but on the proviso that you help them to learn conversation skills along the way. So you don't do that by saying, I'm going to help you learn communication skills along the way. What you do is, instead of sort of nodding and glazing over and going blank when they're talking about Skylanders for the 50th time, which has happened to me, you sort of let them talk about Skylanders and then say, oh, hold on, I didn't quite understand that. Can you tell me that from the beginning? Because it sounded to me like you were talking to me as if I already knew that, and I didn't. And we developed something at home called listening patience. It's what I call a rule of thumb. I like giving autistic youngsters a rule of thumb. It's something that they can go on when rules are so vague and difficult to pin down. So my rule of thumb was, you can talk about your special interests, but if you talk more than 2 minutes without somebody getting a chance to answer back, there's a good chance that they might get a bit bored and run out of what I call listening patience. And this is something I've mentioned in my writing. And so through that little rule of thumb about listening patience, we can learn to have a two-way conversation. So just go about your normal routines at home, but bear in mind that you can teach social skills at the same time. The other thing that is great to do actually is send small recordings, video recordings of yourself saying hello to cousins and friends and so on, and then invite them to send those back. The beauty of that, and I've done it via YouTube with a cousin of ours, is that it slows down the process of interaction. So instead of having to present and think of answers on the spot, they're getting a chance to listen, to digest, to look again, then to formulate a response. So it's kind of slow-mo method of social communication, and they can learn whilst they're doing it. So there's a little bit of a sort of opportunity, if you like, in lockdown to get that sort of learning in. The other thing, now my co-editor Tori Houghton is the person to speak to about speech and language therapy, but when you say how do we work on communication during lockdown, communication opportunities are around us all the time, every day, in every tiny decision that we make. They're around you at home just as much, or if not more, as they are around you at school. So just use your daily activities as a way of developing communication. You needn't lose out just because they aren't at school. Okay, so the next question that I've got here is, how can parents help their children prepare for in-classroom learning? And I gather there's some anxiety there about restarting school. I would say prepare your child in the same way that you prepare them for anything new. Get as much visual information as you can. If that means requesting a short visual introduction from their new teacher, say, that they could watch. That's a good idea. Or a virtual tour of the school or the classroom. So it's not out of question to have that sort of visual introduction, photographs if not videos. Go through it with them. I'd say some autistic children like to be warned well in advance, and some that just gives them a little bit more time to build up anxiety, and they prefer slightly less warning. So you will know from your child what's the best. The cue is if they start asking questions about it, showing that they're anxious, then that is the time to sit down and say, let's go through it. Or if they don't have words, like Alec, I have a lot of pictures. I've already got a picture story showing his new teacher, showing on the calendar the day that he's going to see this new teacher and her photograph. And I think with anxiety, the best thing is to say, all the other children are starting from the same point. They've all had a gap just like you, and things will be different for them as well. So trying to sort of reinforce the idea that expectations of them will not be great whilst they are getting used to a new way of working. Okay, next one is a tricky question, but one I've seen before, and it's not surprising you're asking it. How to identify if your child will need help from a mental health professional, such as if you think your child is exhibiting signs of depression, a general anxiety disorder, hypochondria, or acrophobia. There's no question whatsoever that lockdown is having some effects on all of our children's mental health, whether they're autistic or not. No question about it at all. And my own son Alec has exhibited far more signs of OCD than he did do previously. And in fact, I've referred him to a mental health specialist for that as well. That said, things might very well calm down when they are back in their school routines. I am not a mental health professional. I wish to underline that fact. But what I can say is that I tend to use a rule of thumb. If it is interfering significantly with their functioning, and if it's not something that you're used to, then yes, you do have cause for concern, and you should be asking some questions, even if it's over the phone of your GP. Discuss it with your GP, and together, hopefully if your GP knows you well, they can assess whether they would recommend a referral. There's also a fantastic book that I'd like to recommend to you, The Parent's Guide to Managing Anxiety in Children with Autism by Raylene Dundon. Raylene is one of my favourite authors. She has got a brilliant turn of phrase and she speaks some real wisdom. And she has got a section of that particular book that answers exactly that question. So I would highly recommend Raylene's book. Okay, another question. Since the lockdown, my 9-year-old child has become much more easily triggered and loses her temper in situations that wouldn't previously have bothered her. She shouts, slams doors, is tearful and hostile. What can I do to help her regain more equilibrium, especially when I'm struggling myself to balance the demands of my professional and domestic lives? Oh, my heart goes out to you, and I'm sure a lot of us are in the same boat. I think that the key is that you are struggling in the same way that she is. The most important thing that you can do as an adult around an anxious autistic child is be calm, because they absorb emotional vibes from you. So in the advice that I've been giving during lockdown, I've been telling parents, if you have to go and bang your head against a wall, do so quietly in a room where they can't see you, but around them, and try and be calm. The number one thing is actually looking after yourself, something that I've tried to do by listening to music and just by watching some favourite TV programmes and just sort of looking after myself to get myself in the sort of calm place that I can be when I need to respond to behaviour that's, shall we say, less than perfect. But also recognise that there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and actually you don't have all the answers. You have some of the answers, but you don't have all the answers at the moment. Those grey areas are extremely difficult for autistic youngsters. But maybe sit down and make space to answer those questions. Make sure they have room for their own space and time as well, that they are not crowded out by noisy siblings all the time, because that can add to their stress. Look at that background stress that I was talking about earlier, and about giving them, the cat's here again, unbelievable. And about giving them back the control where you can. So they can't control COVID, they can't control the restrictions that they're under, but what can they control? What can you give to them to make that microcosm that they're in slightly easier to deal with and more under their control? And maybe they can have a sort of special responsibility for certain things that will give them a lot of pride. But just remember that anger in autism often comes from fear. And if you look at it like that, then you'll get to the heart of the problem that much easier. That said, I would say it's not easy to be around a kid that's in a temper, and you need to look after yourself, tap into your network of friends, let off steam when you're not around them, however you can. Hi, you'll notice that for this question I'm in a different outfit and in a different room with my trusty David Bowie picture behind me. But since it's not the results show of Strictly Come Dancing, I hope you'll forgive me. So a late question in. Hi Debbie, do you have any advice for how to prepare Christopher for going back to school? He's so happy at home, has the same routine every day. He's more talkative and less sensory seeking. When at school, he hardly speaks at home, lots of rocking and flapping. When he goes back, he'll have his EHCP, but nothing is in place yet, so lots of uncertainty. Any advice to help him cope would be great. The fact that we're getting several questions on school just shows to me what a cause of concern this is, and it's not surprising to me at all. I'm actually writing a book at the moment with a co-author, Gareth Morwood, who's a specialist in inclusion in schools, and indeed he was the Senko in my son's high school, and they did such a brilliant job that I've always wanted to write a book for parents and teachers about just how to make mainstream slightly less of a miserable place for autistic kids. It's quite incredible how much lack of flexibility there is in these places. Now, it's not surprising to me that he's much more comfortable at home. I think, given their due, even the best secondary school is not the comfortable environment that home is it, for any of us? There's a lot of noise, a lot of pupils. They are intrinsically not really very autistic friendly places, however hard they try. So it's not surprising to me. And that said, there are things that you can do to prepare him and them to make the transition a bit easier. The first is something I've just been writing about, and it came up earlier in the talk: pivotal comforts. Remember we talked about the fizzy cola, and so your son is always a little bit on the high anxiety side. That just comes with the autism and with the differences he's having to cope with every day. So any way that we can make that fizzy a bit calm during the day will prevent him getting hyper anxious. And these are what I call pivotal comforts in the school day. So identify what makes Christopher really happy and try and arrange for pit stops so that he can experience those things. You think, well, easier said than done. So let's just give you an example. Christopher's been actually one of our front cover boys, so I happen to know that he loves chickens. You can't take a chicken to school, but you can have a picture or two of Christopher's chickens. Now, if he has a desk that he works at in a quiet area, like some autistic children do, and Bobby certainly does this, then you can put those up there and personalise it. If not, some people don't have the opportunity. A friend of mine put together some laminated pictures that were Bobby's favourite things and put them on a stretchy keyring, and we put that in his school bag. Now that means that any time he feels his stress start to build slightly, he has got something there that will bring his arousal system down. Looking at those things that give him real pleasure, it's just going to calm the nervous system a bit. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing that I had some success with is what I call a hug key. So I had a key that did nothing in particular. I think I used it as one of my analogies for a talk. So it was just going spare. And I called it Bobby's hug key. And I put it into his blazer. And I said, anytime you feel a bit lost and you think, I wish Mum was here, just put your hand into your blazer, squeeze your hug key, and that is a hug from me. So again, we're looking at things that will get that nervous system down and help them to become calmer. So as well as that, I've also, sometimes you say reassuring things to your kids, don't you? And you think, oh my goodness, that absolutely hit the nail on the head. They really liked what I said just then. Well, when that happens to me, I write those things down. And especially in the earlier years of secondary school, just write one thing down in a big marker, fold it up and tell him it's in his blazer for him to look at anytime he starts to lose faith in himself. So these are what I call the comforts. And the other pivotal comfort for Bobby is computers. So we negotiated with school for him to have a 10-minute computer pit stop at break time and a bit longer at lunchtime. So he had somewhere that he could switch off. So that's what you can do for the pupil. Apart from getting pictures of what to expect and talking them through what to expect, there's not a lot else that you can do there. But what you can do is chat to school. One of the things I've been writing about is transition to secondary school. And for transition, I like to suggest that people spend a bit of time writing down various points of concern, if you like, things that their children do when they're upset. And then in the next column, what you do about it that really helps. And in the column after that, if there is one, a long-term goal that you're working towards. Just a really simple chart. I'm recommending that people work on this during the last few years of primary school so that they have something solid to give to secondary school. But this is something that you can maybe do during the holidays, and you don't have to stick with what we call like problem behaviour. What makes them really happy? What calms them down when things are starting to stress them? So write those things down and then email it to the form teacher and ask him or her to share it with other teachers. Now, how you do this is really important. I think sometimes ideas aren't welcome from parents because maybe it's seen as micromanaging or over anxious or over controlling. So what I would say is just write a little note to the teacher saying he's been really calm during the holidays. Obviously, we both want that situation to continue. So what I've done is I've pinpointed things that I think will be really helpful. Hope it helps, and I'd be really grateful if you could share it. So quite positive, not, well, we're dreading it and it's going to be awful, and, you know, setting them up to fail. Just something really positive and encouraging, and then they'll be more bound to share it. If you do have any more specific concerns, then do remember you can pick up a phone and talk to the teachers, and just say, I'd like a quick conversation about how things are going, maybe early on in the school term rather than waiting until things go wrong, so that you can nip things in the bud. Gareth and I used to do that quite often, a little catch up every couple of weeks just to see where there was any areas of concern, and that certainly did nip things in the bud. So it's turned into a quite long answer, but I think, Julie, your question is relevant to an enormous amount of people out there, so I hope it helps.